Inspire Instructor podcast, where the learning never stops. Welcome, you wonderful people, to the Inspire Instructor Training podcast. And again, I just want to say thank you for listening and joining us. So on today's episode, we have Fiona Taylor. And with Fiona, who has a wealth of experience within the industry, we are going to talk about Fiona's diagrams that she has with toy cars and how I absolutely love them and recommend everybody goes and gets them because I think they're great for coaching conversations. We also talk a little bit about scaling, which Fiona has a few workshops on, and we dig into our competency, which is all about appropriate and timely feedback. And again, I just want to mention to anyone who isn't a member of Inspire to head over to inspireinstructortraining.com and check out what we have to offer. Also, just as a reminder, we have workshops coming up over starting in May, and head over again to inspireinstructortraining.com and click on the link and you'll be able to see where we're heading. But I'm pretty sure you could get to any one of our workshops within maybe an hour, and if you can't, please let us know and maybe we'll add some more in later on in the year. On to the show. So on the podcast today we have Fiona Taylor from Fiona Drive. Welcome to the podcast, Fiona.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk about a few different things on today's podcast. We're going to have a conversation around scaling. We're going to talk about our one of our competencies, which was the pupil given the appropriate and timely feedback during the session, which I quite like as it's quite a meaty little competency. So we'll get stuck into that. But first, what I want to talk about is your training aids that you have, your little toy cars that I love and all my instructors love, and I recommend for everyone to get. But my question is, so like where did they come about? So like what made you sort of start making these or maybe just explain a little bit what they are for people who can't see your background listening.
It's basically a very simple, clear, uncluttered. It's a diagram of a various selection of roads, and it's just very basic. The things I have on there are just the road markings and maybe a sign or two, but it depends. And sometimes I put the signs in the middle just to help with clarity. You know, for example, the roundabout sign and the mini roundabout sign I've put in the middle, so ADIs have the chance, or PDIs have the chance to discuss which sign goes where. But there's no MSPSL or those kind of things. I leave that up to the person. And it's just basically little cars, but they fit nicely. So you've got the T-junction and they fit really, they precision, I think is the word, so that you can use them. But I've laminated so that you can use a dry white pen and you can draw positions and scribble things on. So there's all sorts of applications and uses, but you can just turn them round. So the T-junction becomes a left turn or a right turn, major to minor. Does that make sense? So yeah. There are a limited number, but as far as I'm concerned, if you've got a roundabout and you need it to be a spiral roundabout, you scribble with the dry white pen on it. Do you see what I mean? So yeah. I want to keep the costs down, but give people what they need. But if you want to know where they came from, I wanted them when I was a PDI.
Right. Really early on,
really early on, yeah. I found some little tiny cars, and I thought, do you know what? I'm going to use these because I was always drawing the same thing. I was really stingy with ink, so I printed off black and white ones to start with, and I just used them myself. But people seem to really respond to them.
Yeah, I remember when I first started out that I used to have just streams of paper in the back of my car of previous drawings that I've made. But yeah, when you flick through them, you're like, oh, there's another parallel parking drawing. There's another parallel parking drawing. There's another junction. Yeah, and you're right. Having these diagrams is good. So was it quite deliberate to and maybe what your reasoning behind this is to not pack it, because I see a lot of presenters out there and there's streams of information on the page. Was it quite deliberate to not have that? And
Yeah.
what was your reasoning behind that?
Absolutely 100% deliberate. Because my preference is get a diagram, get a car, plonk it on, and literally hand it to the pupil next to me. Pupil, driver, full license holder, it doesn't really matter. Fleet driver, especially people with second language as English. It just takes away all the mysticism. And people just really, and then say, tell me what you know. Tell me what you know about roundabouts. And you get loads of information. They do all the hard work. All you've got to do is fill in the gaps.
Yeah, no, I love that, and that's how I use them as well. And I found with previous, because I've had presenters in the past with all the information, that you're trying to have a conversation with the pupil, and you find that they're reading what's on the on the thing, and so one, they're not discovering it for themselves, and so they're not really learning yet. Two, it's distracting from the conversation because there's all this stuff going on, so you can't really have a good and we're going to talk about this later with feedback. You can't have a good conversation because the answers are there on the form. So it's not their true thoughts and feelings. It's what they think the answer should be because it's written down in front of them. So I love them for that. You mentioned there about for non-speaking like non-English speakers, and that's something recently I've sort of kind of discovered it being really not for me. It's something I recommended for one of my instructors, being really helpful, because you get this situation, and I fully understand it from a non-English speaking person's point of view, where your instructor said all this stuff that you've kind of picked up some of the words, because it's in, like, even if you speak relatively good English, it's not like driving instructor has its own language that they won't have come across. So there's a whole bunch of words in there that they don't get. And then you say something like, do you get, does that make sense? Or something like that at the end of it. And they go, yeah. Because why wouldn't you? It seems polite. It's also, you probably, even if you said no, what's the instructor going to do? Just explain it all again, and you're not going to understand it. So these diagrams give you the ability to pass it over, and for any people, but to say, show me what you understand, and they can sort of kind of, yeah, you know that they're getting it then, because they don't have to use language. They can use that sort of kind of, and there was we use some other tips and stuff, like we use Google Translate with this pupil actually. Just had it there in the car, like between them. But the diagrams definitely helped with that. The other thing I find really helpful with the diagrams and the toy cars is creating these sort of kind of coaching conversations. And we talk about a lot of times when coaching, I think, comes up in the driving industry, we get talked about the fact that it's a safety critical environment, and you can't have true coaching because you can't let a pupil go and make that mistake because it's dangerous. But you can on the diagrams. You can let them make the mistake and play it out with the cars and go, oh, I would have hit that car if that had happened. Or, oh, actually, that doesn't seem right. I'm too wide. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So you can have that experimental learning with the toy cars, because nothing matters if those two toy cars crash.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Because it can present problems. For example, I give everyone one type of large vehicle. If they get there's one of the sets that has everything in it, a pedestrian and a bicycle and a large vehicle. Now, most people you can say, imagine this is a bus, or imagine this is the lorry there that we were talking about, and it may be a completely different vehicle. So some of the people on any kind of neurodiversity may struggle with that.
mhm.
So sometimes it is limited, but it's rarer than usual. However, I totally agree that, you just say, imagine this, imagine that, but it's that top down, it's three-dimensional, isn't it? It just creates that different learning. It's deeper learning.
Yeah, and the fact you can hand it to the pupil and let them do the moving the cars around, I think is really, it gets them engaged. All my pupils love it. they're like, oh, get your cars out, let's have a chat.
Yeah.
So it's more them wanting to do the car sort of kind of thing.
Going back to going, sorry, can I just
Yeah, go
interrupt? I just want to go back a little bit to what you were talking about with the instructor language,
on.
like a meeting situation. Really?
Yeah.
Really? A meeting situation with someone whose first language isn't English or, you know, neurodiverse in any way. Sometimes meeting is meeting a person, isn't it? It's not two cars and, parked cars. Why don't we just call it parked cars and have done with it?
Yeah.
Usually things are, it's a bit narrow,
Yeah.
you know. But there's things with the little cars, you do the setup,
Hmm.
and with an approach position, and when the other driver's misunderstood what our driver is doing,
Hmm.
literally do the setup, but then turn the page around 180 degrees, and then that driver can then see what the other driver had perceived in terms of intention. Do
Yep.
you see what I mean? It has a massive impact, but it's the reframing thing. You switch it around. It's top down. It's kinesthetic. It's visual, and even for people with on the whose learning preferences might be anything other like hearing or telling, so that their learning preference is telling you what they want. Just what I mean. It just seems to fit all of them. But
Yeah.
it's those conversations, but literally with somebody whose first language or who has very little understanding of spoken English. And that includes the deaf and hard of hearing community too. You can just do this, yes, this, no.
Yep.
Literally.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's very basic, but it works, especially with a big grin on your face.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And actually, I like the fact you pointed out about um turning the diagrams around, because that's something we do out on the road sometimes, where if you've had an incident happen and you want to explore it a little bit more, you go put the pupil in the other person's, but like go drive down that road the other way and put them in their perspective, so they're seeing all perspectives. And the diagrams allow you to do that at the side of the road if it's not possible maybe to get back to that road. But actually, just from a point of view, anyone listening going off to use these, it is something I when I'm sat in the back of lessons that I have to kind of point out sometimes, is make sure that if particularly if the diagram's between you, like I quite often like say give it to the pupil, but if it is between you, make sure that whatever you're talking about, the diagram is pointing from the pupil to the pupil for their perspective as a
Yeah,
driver. I quite
absolutely.
often see it facing the other way, and I'm like, if I was I am looking at that sideways, and I'm struggling to work out what's going on. So it's like, if you're talking about a roundabout approach to a roundabout, make sure that the approach you're talking about, the pupil has that approach in front of them, so that they're not like, and you can tell when it's not working because their head's twisting around and they're trying to get a perspective around what's going on. Um,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah, so it's definitely sort of kind of, if you're having it in between you, but to be honest, give it to the people, let them put it where they want to put it, and toy cars, and move those cars around. One last thing I want to sort of just.
Pen, even the pen. If you give them the pen, if they don't want to do the cars,
Hmm.
give them the pen. Very often, if you know that person swings a little,
Hmm.
they'll draw the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's to do with pen speed, approach speed, person's speed. So if somebody does things quickly, they'll draw it quickly. And if they draw it quickly, you get the same motion and the same steering motion. So it's really interesting when you start looking at these things, over the
Yeah.
years. Really,
No,
really,
absolutely. That's yeah, I love that. The one thing, and I remember I asked this when I first bought them actually, was, are they magnetic?
yeah.
Um, and they're not magnetic, are they? They're little
They're
rubber
not,
pants. And I remember when you first told me that, I was like, oh, I kind of wanted some magnetic toys. But then you explained to me why they're not magnetic, and and now using them, it makes perfect sense that they're not magnetic. In the fact that they're easier to move around when they're not magnetic.
yeah.
Um,
They
but they
are.
have these little rubber pads so they don't go flying off the
Yeah.
page.
Yeah. There's just enough friction, I think, in
Mm,
my opinion. I mean, I've been devising, updating, and renovating, and I can make the other version, but I just think I'd have to change the structure because it's likely with magnets to scratch the laminates, and then you need a different surface and the rest of
Yeah.
it. And that's what I remember from the mag board. People have showed me their mag boards, and they
Mm.
do tend to get scratched after a while with the.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And also, I just don't think a magnet would move around as well. So it might be okay for setting up a scene, but the thing I like with them is that you can move them around and say, and then you play through the scenario and where would you place the car now, or where would you put the car if this was the situation, that sort of kind of thing, or drive the car
Yeah.
round the
So
roundabout.
I'll be you and you be
Yeah,
them, and you
yeah,
come towards it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have great. Sometimes I just play with these toys. They're great. Don't even
I'll
have to
do
be a
anything.
driving lesson.
They're
I can
not
play
they're
with
training aids, they're not toys, but
them.
every person I've known who has a train set calls it a train layout.
Okay.
But a doll's house is still a doll's house, but it's the same thing, it's the same principle.
Yeah.
People love a small version of a big
A
thing.
big thing. Yeah. No,
People enjoy.
absolutely. And yeah, so I would recommend them to anyone who is looking for a training aid, that declutters the conversation and allows you to just have the conversation in the car. Yeah, definitely. I think I hear PDI sometimes saying they want the information, but I talk them out of it. Because
Yeah, I think they need the information for themselves.
yeah,
We still need to become the experts.
yeah,
And every single PDI or ADI needs to trust their skills with this. And you trust your skills, you get the information, and then you fill in the gaps. And that's what this allows us to do, in my
yeah.
opinion.
But for me, that process happens outside the car. That your job as the trainee, or the instructor is to is to build your knowledge and skills outside the car, so that when you're having these conversations, you don't need that clutter inside the car, or have it on a set. If you want some notes or something, I would have that separately for you, and then but not for the pupil, not in front of the pupil. It just gets in the way of the
Mm.
the conversation. I'm trying to think of like an example. Like sometimes see this with presentation slides. Like if I'm watching a presentation, there's too much writing on there, and you're trying to listen to the person, but you can't because your brain just wants to read what's on the form, and it's that same sort of kind of thing, isn't it? Where it just kind of distracts you from what's actually happening, which is the person talking or the conversation that you're having.
Interesting you say that, because I think that links strongly with the competency that we're going to discuss, actually.
Brilliant. And we will get to that. And we'll come back to that. So before we get to our competency, on this season of the podcast, I've been trying to have a discussion topic with each of my guests. And what I'd like to talk to you about is scaling, because I've seen you do quite a few scaling Zoom sessions. So I feel like
My new work, well, one of my new workshops. Yeah, yeah. Oh,
yeah,
I love scaling
yeah.
the process of scaling, and I think it's much deeper. Um, Unfortunately, it's got the same name, and I can't call it something else. It's the same for me with the principles of coaching,
Okay.
because I have a different concept of coaching compared to the coaching concept that you have. And some people's understanding of coaching sounds more like coaxing to me. Do you see what I mean? I
Hmm.
think a word that has the same meaning but means different things to different people. But my workshops are not about the simple scale that out of 10. That's interesting. Move on. Do better next time. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
So my version is it's more like a process. It's more like,
absolutely.
and it's definitely about conversation.
So that's how I describe scaling, is it is a tool to facilitate a conversation. And it's yeah, it helps the way I remember doing a video on this and explaining that the number doesn't matter, and I repeat, the number doesn't matter, and the point of the number for me is it allows the people to sort of anchor their thoughts and feelings to that number, and then that will help them then have the conversation, because I think you can have the same conversation without the scale, but
Exactly.
yeah, but the scale can sometimes, for certain things, help. Certain pupils and certain things can really help boost that conversation. I'm thinking emotions are really quite good things to scale because it helps like explore that. So you said you got this process. Do you want to share this process with us? And my guess is probably similar to mine, but I'm intrigued.
It's a very similar process. If I give it away,
Yeah.
it's a process, but what I've noticed is it develops so much more. So it develops trust and rapport because you are having a conversation. You now have that equal relationship. It is less instructor learner led.
Hmm.
It is more equal, isn't it? When you're having that kind of conversation and you're asking somebody to develop their own strategy, if you like. But also, my version of scaling, I worked it out. In my opinion, and this is only my opinion, my version of scaling addresses 10, 9 or 10 of the competencies.
I would argue if you're doing well on 10 of the competencies, you're probably dragging the other ones up anyway because they all sort of kind of interlink anyway. So the way it works is yeah, you're going to drag them all up. So yeah, so on that note then, so if people are um let's say we got a PDI listening to that and going, oh, scaling, get me 10 good comps, I'll do a bit of that. The my issue would be that, and I see this a lot where people think scaling is just this good thing that's going to work, but then if you apply it incorrectly, it doesn't work. It doesn't go well. And so, and I would say the biggest mistake that I see is that the putting an importance on the number.
Mm,
And I see where this comes from in a way, because if you think about like the DVSA like materials and stuff, and they have this syllabus of things, and they have actually gone away from it being like 1 to 5 recently, and it's more like prompted, seldom prompted or something, haven't they? But which is still a scale, realistically. But the problem with those sort of scales is the number does matter in a way on those. Like the whole point is to get fives on all of them so you can go and take your driving test. And I think people take that into scaling. So when they talk about parallel parking, the goal is to get to 10 so that they can take their driving test. And I see that being the biggest issue. Do you see that when you're sort of kind of having your Zoom sessions with?
uh, no, not really,
Okay.
because I've got the process behind
Yeah.
it. I need to think carefully, but I know exactly what you're saying because when you scale out of 10, something like a skill set like parallel parking, once someone achieves a 10, is that 10 everywhere and permanent?
Yep.
I totally agree with the number of that. Um, but it doesn't address the situations where a person is going to be affected by their thoughts and feelings in any situation. Do you see what I mean? So
Yeah.
that kind of scaling is skills based, and I think that's where people limit it. I
Yep.
don't think, and you said it earlier, it's useful in all sorts of aspects.
Definitely. Yeah, and I would probably say even more so in thoughts and feelings than in skills. Like you can apply it to skills, but um, yeah, it's more so in digging in. But for me, again, it's just this idea of facilitating a conversation that you could have without the numbers. The numbers help, and it doesn't have to be numbers as well. I think we're sort of clear on that. Actually, that I'll ask you that is, what's your favorite other scale that's not numbers?
Mine, it relates to the person.
Okay.
So it's conversation based. So mine would be. relating to the person and what they do, what their hobbies are. Or
Yeah, so you link it to. Have you got any particular that you've had with pupils that you've like, oh, I quite like that as a scale option?
my favorite ever one was one not done by me, but done by a colleague. And it was uh, a nurse scaling fear. And I can't talk about it because it was it wasn't,
Personal sort of
it
thing.
was, well, as an ex-nurse,
Yeah.
it was hilarious, absolutely hilarious. And that's the beauty of this and these type of conversations. And that's what I mean. You end up having a conversation with an adult on an equal basis.
Mm.
This is not um, skills-based training where it just levels the playing field, and as far as I'm concerned. And anything that I develop will have and anything I offer, I believe has an aspect that other people aren't providing. Because, you know, I've been delivering standards check training for years. I don't advertise it. I don't. Do you see what I mean? I was asked to do it before
Yeah.
I delivered a structure of standards check training. So I was, you know, people knew me and knew that I had, you know, my preference for coaching and client-centered learning. So anything that I offer has to have something else as a training aid for us, because I think that's something that we've been quite let down about. In what part of our training are feelings and thoughts addressed?
Yep. No, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, the bigger picture of driver training is it's massive compared to the skills-based training that we've all had. Well, that's what I had.
Yeah, I definitely, yeah. Role play is the proper problem with
Yeah.
that. And when,
Make them drive like you do. That's what I
mm,
was told on my part three. Make them drive
yeah,
like.
yeah, no, absolutely. And when it was a role play test, the issue was that you knew the person next to you could drive, and you knew that if you said the right things, the magic words, then they would be like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, and then they would fix their driving. So it did become this almost a game, really.
Yeah.
Is
I
is
wasn't successful on my first one because I wasn't forceful enough.
too many questions.
No, 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 no.
Yeah.
He was not slowing down enough, and I wasn't.
Oh, you needed to shout
I
at them.
wasn't saying
Yeah,
break more, break harder.
God.
So yeah,
Yeah, I'm glad we've come away from that. I think it still lingers behind in the
yes,
industry, but I think that the further away we can come away from it, the better. I must
yeah,
admit, I much prefer training PDIs to do the job rather than do this magical test. Because I believe the part three is doing the job.
yeah,
And there's nothing like there's some differences, but generally it's just a driving lesson that you should be doing week in, week out.
yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. I sort of kind of, yeah, 100% agree with that. You said something else.
Scaling addresses the feedback issue as well. Just
Mhm.
saying, it addresses the feedback issue, as in get feedback first before you give it,
Yep,
because they may solve the thing. They may say exactly what you need them to say. So ask them first. You know,
they generally do as
they
well. Yeah.
really, they honestly, and the belief is that we have to, you know, identify, analyze, and remedy.
Hmm.
And we need to be able to do that. Absolutely, 100%. We need to be able to work out that there is a thing, what some options of solutions might be, but we're not them and they're driving. But the scaling process is a lot of fun. As you've said, you know, you can scale all sorts of things in different ways. And it turns learning into an experience thing. Experiential learning is what we all need to do. For example, when you get a new phone, do you read the manual?
I don't
Or
think they give manuals out anymore.
exactly, I wonder why.
Yeah.
So the manufacturers have realized that they're just wasting money and no one's reading them, so they don't offer it. offer
Yeah.
it as a PDF online. So rote learning was what we were taught, wasn't it? Rote learning. Tell me about your MSPSL or whatever those acronyms are. But scaling, when you research it, as a weirdo might, not me, of course. Roll six, roll six, unit 3 of the National Standard for Driver and Rider Training, creating a conversation based on mutual respect. It's got that phrase in there, and that's what scaling is. When you have the bigger picture of scaling, that's what you're doing. And it also says National Standard for Driver and Rider Training 6.3.3 coach is all about engaging in a conversation to help them identify obstacles to learning and strategies for overcoming those obstacles. So it's help them identify obstacles.
Yeah, absolutely. And
help them identify strategies for overcoming those. So this is the process, and this is why you're a fan of it.
Yeah, 100%. And we've been through the national standards on previous podcasts, and it came up in those conversations. I think there's it just all interlinks, doesn't it? And scaling like can group it all together. So
as
with
a tool, it's that tool, the conversation tool, and it gives a structure. So that's what my workshop does. It gives a structure to it, so then people can develop it. And then, as you say, once you've developed it, you do it without realizing that you're actually doing scaling.
Yeah, it just becomes a conversation at that point. Yeah. So with that then, so would you use scaling all the time, or do you sometimes like not feel like that it's appropriate in that scenario?
I think once the people you're with are used to the process, it just happens.
Hmm.
In my initial days of scaling, I was new to it at some point as well. And I can remember driving around with people, and then they'd suddenly just be driving along and they'd go, "That was so a 10." I was like, brilliant. What was? Because I don't even know what they were referring it to. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Because they're so used to me asking what went well, how did that go? They're so used to reinforcing the brilliant things that they've done, because that's what scaling can do.
Yep.
Really focuses on the things that they've got right.
Hmm.
And that's vital. Most times with scaling, so I mean, I could ask you to scale your choice of clothing for today, for example, out of 10.
To be honest, not high, because I always make the mistake of wearing green, which doesn't always work with the green screens and stuff.
So, I mean, in
Let's go 4.
4,
Yeah.
you better sort out your clothing and your green screen then, hadn't you?
Yeah.
I mean, it can be as brutal as that, scaling.
Mm.
That is just horrible. And
Yeah.
did you notice how you answered me when I said scale it? You said not brilliant because, and you're already on the defensive
Yeah, definitely. So
already. And this is why it needs to be a process. And it's not about the number, it's about the conversation. So when we get better at it, we kind of have those underlying principles that we can really explore better.
yep, and I think it links to what you were talking about earlier about being a coaching conversation, and it's one of these things. And I think I'm sure I've had this conversation with people in the past that, um, or heard people talk about in the past, that the issue I think sometimes can happen with someone will come on a course like yours, or watch one of my videos and then go, oh, I'll go and give that a go, and they go give it a go, and it doesn't quite work because they're new to it. Like you said, you were new to it at some point. I was new to it at some point, and I'm sure probably both did a horrible job compared to what we would do now. And the point is, you've got to stick at it. You've got to carry on. applying it, because there's a couple of things I think that happens. One, you get better at it and get more used to the conversation. But like what you just said about your pupils get used to it. Like if you turn up on a lesson and you've been telling your pupils all the time and you suddenly start asking them these questions, they're going to be thrown. You like maybe pre-warn them a little bit that we're going to try this new thing today. But even then, it's still new to them. You have to kind of your pupils will get used to you having these conversations, and then you will start to get those better answers, and it's all about rapport as well and building trust, and they will start to sort of give you those answers like you said before you even ask the question. Like I've done that before as well, where if something has happened and I've gone to speak and they've just given me everything that they've gone, nope, you don't need to talk. I've got this sort of thing, and they give you all the answers, and they do all the analysis themselves, and then off they go and have another go. And because you've, in a way, you've trained them to self-analyze, and if anything, I think that could be one of the most important skills that we give them as drivers, because it means post-test, when we're not there to having those conversations, and they have a situation, and who doesn't when they first go out on the road have a like a, oh, that was close, and instead of going, oh, that blooming driver cutting the corner or whatever, they're able to analyze their part of the process, and we create people who don't just get experience but are able to like use that experience to get better at driving, because I
Yeah.
think experience only works if you use it to get better.
Yeah, they've done studies, research suggests that new drivers who are involved in a near miss are more likely, if they're coached, they're more likely to reassess and evaluate it rather than just stay static. If they're so absolutely these conversations, and this is what I mean about the training programs that I develop are all focused for post-test driving, because everyone else is doing all the other things and probably doing a way better job than me. But my brain works, well, I say it works in inverted commas. My brain has a different way. And, it's why I have my car and diagram sets, because I feel like that works for me and them.
Mm-hmm.
It works. Because I've got another course that it's not out yet, but I keep doing other things rather than developing it. And it's a similar thing, but it's about speed.
Okay.
I'm so excited about that one. Can't tell you, but I haven't done it yet.
Well, we look forward to seeing that one coming out. Shall we move on to our competency, which, like we said, we have skirted around a little bit with the conversations we've had, because that's
It's
that's
all
kind
linked. Yeah, it's all
of,
linked.
that's the nature of it. It isn't just go and do this competency, go and do that competency, and having worked my way through the other 13 so far, it I've yet to come across a conversation with one of the trainers where we haven't gone, oh, it's linked to this and it's linked to that, because that's not how the competencies work. You can't tick the boxes. You have to have like like an holistic approach to the whole process, and all the numbers will go up. So the competency we're going to discuss is, was the pupil given appropriate and timely feedback during the session? I'm going to start with just asking you what your thoughts on that competency are, Fiona.
Um, I think it's massive. I think this is a really big version of the competency. And I think if you look at any of the competencies, you need to look at each individual word. And when I deliver training, obviously, my focus is asking the person, and I haven't got anyone here. We're talking general terms, which is really out of my comfort zone. But was the pupil given? And then appropriate, timely feedback during, for me, are the really important words to get somebody to tell me about. Seeing there isn't anyone here, then you and I will have to just sort of go through. But was the pupil given feedback? And I usually ask people, well, what does that mean?
Yeah,
And what does it mean old school? And what does it mean now?
definitely. So for me, in this, for the feedback element for me, and I know we're sort of kind of going through the given part, is I the way I see the word feedback, I think it can be a bit misleading in people maybe think of like a feedback form that they
Yeah.
get from like the end of a course. And so it's like give your opinion. Um, Whereas they be better off thinking of it as in terms of like maybe a radio feedback, and you get feedback and it's just information. And that's all it is. It's feedback is information being passed between you. And conversations basically. It's like what we talked about. Like this is just about have a conversation. Were
I was
conversations.
going to say, feedback is a conversation.
Yeah.
It is. It is a conversation.
Yeah. The appropriate's interesting. Because I think that can get marked down on this competency a lot is
Yeah.
having the appropriate conversation. So I think within the competency it says this about how you could be having some great technical information, really good like stuff, but it's not appropriate for what you're trying to get out of the session today. So then it becomes a distraction, which will then also get you marked down on other competencies. So I think making sure that you're not overwhelming the pupil with too much conversation, and I can see that happening on a part three because, of course, you sat there and you're thinking, "Oh, I've got to show what I can do," and so you feel like you need to talk the entire time. And there are a couple of competencies throughout the thing where it literally tells you to shut up.
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the in there.
See, I split that, what you've just been talking about, I split that into two
Mm-hmm.
for my thought process. So the appropriate, and I hear what you're saying, I totally agree. Appropriate from the first perspective is goal focused.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than talking about all the other weird and wonderful things that they've done well or superb or, not or not, appropriate feedback should be surrounding the goal or the intention of the session, whatever you want to call it, whatever the work is of this, whether it's approach speed to roundabouts or, I don't know, measuring a gap or dealing with crossings. It doesn't matter what it is, does it? So it needs to be appropriate and goal focused. Appropriate also needs to be safety critical. I just want to highlight that. You cannot leave it. It has to be appropriate in terms of do not leave it out if you've had to intervene in any way, even verbally. If you've
Mm-hmm.
had to do something, say something, you have to, and we can talk about that with the timely bit, but safety critical, it needs to be appropriate.
Definitely. And it kind of goes back to the car thing I was talking about, how you're able to experiment with the toy cars. Sorry, not toys, are they? But
They are toys, they're so toys.
um but so you're able to experiment with them. You can't do that on the road. So there is the element of the fact that you have to intervene to keep everyone around you safe.
Absolutely.
And yeah, absolutely, that's going to get marked down on this one if you're not, because that's if you're not intervening, that's inappropriate feedback is being
Yeah.
silent. Or you could have the other way around, I suppose, where you do intervene and it's not safe as well. So I've seen that where you I don't know, maybe going through an amber light and you tell the people to stop, and actually it was probably more dangerous to stop. So if you're making incorrect decisions, I remember there being one story from a PDI a while back about going into a roundabout, and I think the they were just stressed, but the PDI said go or something like that, and it wasn't a safe decision. So that would again be marked in this section as well, because
Yeah, appropriate.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So, and I think just to mention, if something is going to happen, for example, approach to the traffic lights, and they have been on green a while, just to mention it before it becomes an issue at all.
Hmm.
They've been on green a while.
What might happen? Yeah,
Yeah, because then it's not safety critical and it's just drawing attention to.
yeah,
But,
yeah. So that's like kind of being proactive, isn't it? And
yeah, but this is being aware of everything that we're supposed to be doing. and this is, as you say, everything is linked to everything else.
Yeah.
Every single one of these is linked.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just looking at again, I just kind of want to reiterate this feedback part, because I think this gets confused a lot in
Yeah.
this. So when we're pulling, like, I can see somebody reading this form, reading this competency, and thinking that they need to pull over at some point, maybe not pull over, but let's say they've pulled over, and look at that and go, I need to give the pupil feedback on what's going on. It even says, like, be encouraging and when it's going well, and I can't remember the other word they use for when it's not going well, but offering solutions, I suppose. But a lot of it does feel like it's quite worded towards the instructor doing the work in that situation. And I think that's something we need to be careful with in the wording. The DVSA maybe could have worded it quite slightly better. The concept is correct, but I think we need to be careful that it's not that one-way conversation. Like, it goes back to the scaling. Like, if you're having a scaling conversation around this, it's going to be two-way. It just, the nature of that conversation has to be two-way. Apart from when you get the examiner in the back going, oh, I don't think it was a 4, actually.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it's the interpretation.
Yeah.
Feedback given. It doesn't say given by whom.
No.
Is it whom or who? Anyway, whoever.
No idea. That's not my.
No, mine either. No, but it doesn't say who gives the feedback, and if
Yeah.
there is the opportunity for it to come back, because it's that experiential learning. If someone tells you, oh, as you said, it happens all the time when we encourage that kind of, but you have to encourage it. Rapport is something that you need to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And most people that get in our cars are expecting us to just tell them what to do. And we have to nurture that safety that they can just say, oh, do you know what? I might have done a thing there. I might do it differently next time. We have to nurture that environment, and they have to trust us. So it's that rapport thing. But I hear what you're saying, because sometimes people say to me, oh, you coaches, you're all talking about feelings, and I think you can be really quite honest with people if they feel safe, because feedback needs to be relevant to the situation. Don't start giving feedback on something that's not this topic of conversation or not having happened here. Needs to be honest. And I think honest feedback is critical. It's really useful. For example, sometimes people are not conscious of how they use the brake pedal because they're holding on, they've got something to brace against, and they also know when they're going to do the final push with that foot pedal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I can visualize it in my head. Yeah.
You can visualize it in your neck.
Yeah, my neck.
So, but it's about having that honest conversation about it doesn't feel the same from over here. I would just like to bring that up to see what I'm, and it's and be honest about if somebody's doing something that they need to have feedback about, but it's not a topic that they can, do something about now. For example, if you've had to give them some feedback of, have you seen the pedestrian approaching the crossing?
Mm-hmm.
When the goal is something completely different. Have you seen the pedestrian? Maybe we could talk about observations on another session.
Yeah.
Or, do you see what I mean? Observations and where you're going to be looking to, flag it as a topic for development. And you can flag all sorts of things. You flag all sorts of things. But positive, but the feedback also needs to be relevant, but it needs to be honest, but it also needs to be positive. It's got to be positive feedback first.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean not, like you say, the honesty part of that, you still need to So how actually, let me ask you then. So how do you, because I know I've had been asked this question. So how do you recognize an error in someone's driving? How do you keep that honest and positive at the same time?
Is the error the folk? It's the error the everything they've done.
Okay.
So if it's negotiating a roundabout, as an easy example that we all recognise, and um, you know that they've done the approach speed perfectly, the appropriate mirrors, timely signal, going round, choosing the right lane, really going round really well, signalling to exit, if it's appropriate, moving across, checking the mirrors after they've done it. How many of those things, if the one thing they didn't do was have a really good look to make sure there was no one on the outside when they were moving across, no one to move into. It might be something you've done. And you can just first of all say, tell me what was good.
Yep.
Anything else? Anything else? Anything that you would rather do differently next time? You can just ask it.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, no, I 100% agree. The other thing I'd add to that actually is I see this on sessions, and because the honesty thing is really, I think, really important. And I think particularly for I see this more in like PDIs than instructors, where it's almost like they're trying to be nice. Uh,
Yes.
and they don't like, and I get it. Like you want to be nice, you want your pupils to like you and stuff. So you end up not mentioning the thing that's going wrong because you're like, oh, that was all right, it's okay, don't worry, that sort of kind of thing. And that doesn't help anyone. And actually, I think the way I describe it as well about making it positive is if you raise that their awareness of the issue and then work out the solution together, and go and then put that solution into place, what ends up happening towards the end of the session that and you have a conversation with the end of at the end of the session about what's gone well today, they end up actually telling you all the stuff that initially went wrong. They're like, oh, I'm so happy that I've now can do this. And that's where you get the positive from, is that rather than that, and I see this at the end of lessons where you go, okay, so what's gone well, and they might give you a couple of things, and then what would you like to work on, and they list all the stuff that they did wrong, but because we didn't like, and they've seen it, like, so you saying, oh, don't worry about it, that's not going to stop them worrying about it. We need to kind of like address it, bring it up, and it can be done in a non-judgmental way, and raise their awareness of it, and then go fix it, and it becomes the buzz from the lesson because I fixed something and I'm better at it now.
Yeah.
So it absolutely, I think that's the way I would look at that. Don't think of it as this, when we're being honest, sort of kind of thing. Don't think of it as you're beating them over the head with a stick about something that's gone wrong. You're basically raising their awareness of something they can develop, which they will love because they get to develop it, and they're in the car there to develop. So
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that really crucial. I think that honesty, and the feedback thing is really, really crucial. And you've mentioned rapport a few times. And I must admit, anybody that I get on here that mentions rapport a few times, I'm like, yep, definitely, you're on my wavelength for training. Because it's so crucial. And you talked about earlier about when they get in the car for the first time. I don't think, and this is, I think, probably the biggest challenge we have. One of the biggest challenges we have is that they're not expecting the relationship that they're going to end up having, or hopefully should have. They're expecting this teacher pupil, which they've been used to, and I'm sure there are some great teachers out there that don't have that, and they're the ones you remember. I remember thinking back to school. They probably never been taught in like back when we were at school. They probably haven't been taught to be like that, but they were just naturally like that. They're the ones you remember, and I think that's the relationship you need to build. But it won't happen overnight. It needs to. I think you need to make it clear that this is how we're going to be, so they know. But then it still is going to take lesson after lesson of being non-judgmental, building that rapport, getting their opinion, and them suddenly going, oh, I can say what I want in this car. And it will take time. And I think that's what I was talking about earlier, when people go on a course or something and they just expect it to work, and it won't. It will take like a while of you sort of kind of repeatedly doing this with your pupils for you to get better at it and for your pupils to get used to it.
I had some feedback literally this morning from one of the most recent people who came on my scaling course. And he said, I've written it up and I've put it on my dashboard, the process. And he said, I feel a bit stupid, especially when they're going to test. But I'm doing better with it. So, and it is all of these things, and certainly these sort of things, if you link this with scaling yourself, for example. I know I'm bringing back the scaling, but this is just the perfect thing to do. Choose a competency for the day and have a think about how it's gone afterwards. That's what we're asking our drivers to do.
Yeah.
Totally asking what our drivers do. But just to point out, Phil,
Yeah.
you actually did the same thing when I said scale your clothing. You
Yeah.
did that, well, yeah, but and you would we it's a natural thing when people ask us to do something that we give the negative first. It's kind of a self-defense thing. And this is the thing about rapport. And it's also about listening, which I don't think is a competency, but I think it should be.
We love that to be a competency. Um, yeah. I suppose it is in the competencies in the fact that if you don't listen properly, you probably fall down on other stuff like instinctively. But yeah, no, that would be great. Did the instructor listen?
Did the instructor listen and listen to body language and all those subtle things,
Yeah, I can imagine that'd be quite hard to judge, to assess, but yeah.
Well,
but it just
you notice when it doesn't happen, we always start off with full marks for this, don't we? We start off with a clean sheet.
Yeah, definitely. The the interesting thing about the you're right, when you asked me to scan my jumper, I went negative, and that is human nature. And I think there's also the element of what we're talking about in rapport, because we don't really like we this is the first time we've had a conversation, and I can imagine if we'd had hundreds of these sessions and stuff, that response might be different, if that makes sense, because we'd have a like a the closer rapport, more trust, and that's not anything to do with you. We just don't know each other that well. So it just go to show that sort of kind of thing that it's not going to happen just on the whim instantly. It has to be used to it. And actually, I'm not used to being asked to scale my stuff, so that's probably
That's right, isn't it? Yeah.
it's I must admit I always find it awkward being asked what to scale anything really. I can do it myself, if that makes sense. Like I'll coach myself through scaling, but when other people ask me, I always find it really really awkward. And that's what your pupils do. But then the reason I find it awkward is because it doesn't happen very often. Like I'm not very often in scenarios where I'm being asked to get like scale scenarios. But if you're doing it regularly with your pupils week in, week out, of course, at first they're going to find it awful. Not awful, but awkward. And over time, they will get used to the process and they'll start answering your questions before you even get there.
Yeah, some of them refuse. I've had a PDI recently. I'm not doing that. I hate scaling. Okay.
Yeah.
But I just did. And I just chose one of the other things, and it was appropriate to that person.
Yeah.
Who has come round to the process now.
Nice. I think that's because, and that comment, my guess is because they're not aware of like what scaling should be, and I think that's where I hate scaling comes from.
Yeah, I think it's the expectation. It's the what if I say a number and you don't agree with it? Now I'm going to feel stupid. I don't know what you want me to say. And there's all of that. And it's that. And this is where the rapport it comes in. They have to feel safe and it's like, I agree. It's nothing to do with the number. The number is totally irrelevant.
No.
Totally.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I know.
Yeah. Shall we talk about timely? Because you picked out that as one of your words. Why do you think it's important to be timely with your feedback?
Timely as in it has to be at the right time.
Mhm.
So let's say there's an unavoidable safety critical. So you have to intervene whether you say something or you've had to use the dual controls or you've had to intervene. So a safety critical incident. It could be that you're driving down the road and you cannot talk about it. Would you agree?
Yeah.
But you, the driver, and the person in the back need to know that you will sort that out. So my phrase is stick a flag in it.
Yep.
And you just say anything that I don't like giving people phrases, but it's literally stick a flag in it. Remember this situation at this crossing in a minute. Don't worry about it. I'll talk about it then. But very often, even the simple things, we go yada, 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 yada. So timely feedback is, this should be agreed at the beginning. What do you want from this bit of drive? This is agreed as in, risk management. We should be saying to them, do you want me to talk or not? What do you do, Phil? You're driving down. Do you drive in London very often?
I have driven in London, and every time I do, the next time I get the train.
So brilliant. That's useful for me.
Yep.
Driving in London, what do you do when it's getting a little bit busy and what do you do with the radio?
Yeah, radio goes off. Everybody has to shut up in the car. Yeah, the concentration zoom turns on.
So why is it we're expecting new drivers to be able to listen, interpret, do, think, and do all of these things all at the same time? Yada, 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 yada.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Now, sometimes driving instructors talk about useful things, and sometimes it's just over instruction. Would you agree? You must have heard that.
Yeah. It's also sometimes like, oh, like too in depth for conversation for the side of the road. For not for sorry, for on the move. Like
Yeah.
you can't have those like deep thinking thoughts while driving, and you can't. The other thing is trying to get a pupil to picture a junction in their head behind that's just happened while stuff is going on. Like that's two visual images going on, and it's just not that's not going to work. Yeah,
Literally stick a flag in it and
yeah,
say, remember this. They'll say, what did I do wrong? Yada, yada, because that's how it's going to be to start with. But then you can change it round. And
yeah.
you can say, what are your thoughts on that? Or what are your solutions for that? Do you see what I mean? But you can rely on your skills, but ask first. This is
Yeah.
feedback received and then given. And then this is where our skills, and this is why it is hard because you need to choose, but put a flag in it, but please remember to go back to it. And I agree. The examiners are okay, aren't they? If you pull up at the side of the road just to discuss something, because that is really difficult to do. And like you say, you go to London, everyone in the car has to shut up and you've turned the radio off. And
Yeah,
you're a license holder, driver trainer.
yeah. I should be pretty decent at it, but
I mean, I feel the same. I feel the same.
no,
All
no
of us do it, even
worries.
if we're looking for a new pupil, aren't we? Looking for number 372 and the stereo goes down or whatever. It's just how it goes. It's just how it goes. It's overload. So silence is a useful tool, but some people find silence uncomfortable. So it might be chit chat, but this is all about agreeing that structure before you go out, isn't it?
Hmm.
Before you do the next thing.
With the flagging thing, because again, I agree, and I use the pop a pin in it or pop a flag in it, or remember that yellow car for me. Then I'm just saying yellow car because there's one on your shoulder.
Oh, I've got no one to.
So the yeah, it's and flagging it for that, and I think probably the other thing, and this maybe again links to another competency about your area planning is knowing places that you can pull over and have these conversations, because I think it's really important that although you're putting like a pin in it, that you you are able to pull over relatively shortly after, because otherwise other stuff happens. And then you're pulling over and you're having several conversations, and it all just gets a bit messy, and then you're having to prioritize, and it's just a bit confusing. The other thing I sometimes suggest to instructors is to maybe, depending on what happened, but maybe up your level of instruction a little bit until you get that opportunity to pull over, because like you said, as soon as you say put a flag in it, that the pupil, even if they don't start trying to have that conversation with you, it's running through their mind. So they're distracted anyway,
Yeah,
whether you've sort of having the conversation or not. So trying to get them to come back and focus on the road is important, and that could be your level of instruction to just shortly sort of up your level of support to get you somewhere safe without loads of other stuff happening. And it might be that the things happens bump their heart rate up as well, and we need to kind of calm them down. So get yourself somewhere safely, and then that will allow you to just have that one conversation, and it not be this sort of kind of catalogue of snowballing effect going on.
that's it. I've done that. You know, it's almost worth a whole session in itself, isn't it? How to deal with those kind of things, those
Mhm.
distractions. It's massive for us
Yeah.
as drivers permanently. And it's how do you shut up the kids or whoever's in the car, you know?
Yeah.
It's those sort of things. So yeah, I mean it could be, and it could just be just that statement. Remember, we'll talk about that. Focus on this now.
Yeah.
Focus on your driving now. That's fine. Can't do anything about that. Not a problem. And just relax them about it, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, and the other thing actually you were saying about like relaxing and stuff, and we'll talk about it in a minute. I think this also goes back to how your previous lessons have been with pupils. If all your lessons are about pulling over to give them a bollocking, uh, then the second you say that, flagging that, oh, what have I done, sort of thing. But actually, if you're pulling over because you plan to pull over and assess what's gone on, then they're not necessarily. It might be if you do this regularly to pull over and talk about like a really good thing. Like remember that junction could be that you fully nailed it, and I want to have a chat about why and how, and well done.
Yeah.
And I think the more you do that, the less they are then expecting this just to be a negative thing as well. So it all builds up from previous lessons.
Totally agree. It's something I love to do. Just, you know, really early on is just keep pulling over and saying, tell me about that. What did I do wrong? I don't know. Can you tell me? I wasn't pulling you over for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
So
absolutely.
it's a really positive thing.
And we do learn from positives like better, I find, where you're able to sort of reinforce. I think that probably for me the important thing is not just pulling over to praise. Um, Praise is great, but I think it's important for the pupil to understand what got them there, and like what did they do to. So in the same way that if someone's made a mistake, you may ask them what would they do differently next time. It's when you've done it well, what did you do differently, or what did you do that made this work? Because
Yeah.
that's helps them sort of, that helps that stick and sink in. So it can be the same. It's basically the same process, whether it's gone well or
It's
gone wrong.
this reverse thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Why did I squeak with joy?
yeah,
I'll often do that. You know.
yeah.
You know, I just do I can't help it. I just do a little excited thing. And you can see smug mode
Yeah,
from the driver who's just realized that you are acknowledging. So but these things are, and I totally agree how wonderful it is. People can give me feedback all they like about something I may have done well, but I have to perceive it from my own perspective.
yeah. You have to
Because
sort of be able to analyze it.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Because
something you.
we often give compliments to people, and we know you know that they haven't got it, and they just
Hmm.
go, yeah, and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's interesting. Something that I quite often say to my instructors that it's, if you say something, if you input into the conversation, whether that is feedback, as in positive feedback, or whether it's just technical information, something that people didn't know, and and that's fine. It's a technical thing that we're trying to teach them. That sometimes they just don't know stuff. It's okay to, and I think sometimes maybe with coaching, people get confused that they're not allowed to kind of give the information. I'm like, it's perfectly fine to say this is the information, but what I always suggest that is you then get them to analyze what you've just said. So, for example, you might say, I'll just give really like an obvious example of like approaching the roundabout slower will give you more time to see, something like that. Now, I would expect people maybe to work that out themselves, but if they didn't and you'd given that information, so I would then ask like, well, what are the advantages of that? What are the disadvantages of driving in that style? And get them to do the pros and cons list effectively. And I think that helps the pupil buy into what you're saying, or work it out for themselves that actually they disagree and they're going to try this slightly differently for them. And you see what I mean? It's sort of kind of like getting them to do the analysis allows it to sink into their mind, but also for them to buy into the process and not just listen to you having told them something, basically. And it applies to praise just as much as technical.
I agree. I've got another thing I like doing. Same principle. If it is the approach, rather than saying it, say, do you want to play a game? No. Most people are up for that. Obviously, there are people who wouldn't consider it. You need to pick your people for this. Do you want to play a game? I tell you what, just for a bit of fun, would you come up to this roundabout slower than you think is necessary? Just do it too slow, and then tell me what you notice after.
Yeah.
Because you can do all of these things by giving someone a little mini challenge. You can call it a mini challenge, or you can call it a game, depending on the person.
Yeah, no, I fully and I love that because I do that all the time. I get them to over exaggerate. I'm
Yeah,
like,
you play with little cars in your car. I've heard all about you.
yeah, so it's like and like just yeah, like I'm like no slower than you think you need to, or like really exaggerate. I want to be bored by the time I get to this roundabout, okay? And yeah, I love that sort of stuff because it they suddenly like realize, oh, this works.
They're looking for
Or maybe sometimes you find they do say that it is too slow, and maybe it was, and but that's fine because they're analyzing it and they're working out why and stuff. So absolutely.
what did you notice? What were the benefits? And it's those kind of questions, isn't it? And this is where people need to feel safe to say, I didn't notice any different. And then it's the second question that might be more useful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, yeah, stuff like that is great where you set them a challenge, and I think again you're talking about how you're getting them to analyze stuff and notice stuff, and that's experimental learning, isn't it? Like what we're talking about is like it's not always about trying to do everything perfect. Sometimes you have to experiment with it safely,
Yeah,
being a little bit wrong, so that they can experience what a little bit wrong feels like.
absolutely. Yeah.
When safe, obviously not like 50 miles an hour into a roundabout, but um, like moving off and stopping is a really good example of that. Like experiment with bringing the clutch up too fast, but experiment with going too slow in second, so that like what does it feel like when you go too slow in second, and then we take
Yeah.
away that sort of fear factor of what it should be and stuff. So absolutely experiment with these things.
Yeah.
um so I think I'm going to wrap it up there because I think we've covered a lot of that. Have you got anything else you want to add for that competency before I do?
I think there's just the honest. You can ask a question about something they don't mention. You
Okay.
know, so in terms of that, it's just ask a question about something they haven't mentioned. Do you know what I mean? If you know there's an issue with something,
Hmm.
tell me about how you were using the brake pedal. Oh, it was a little bit jerky. Yeah, I can work on that. It's you can, if you want to get some feedback about an awkward thing or something they haven't told you was they've done well, you can just ask a question about something. Tell me about you on that roundabout example I gave you, where they did everything really well. Tell me about your mirror check. Oh, I
Yeah.
did it on the approach. Oh, do you see what I mean? So that honesty can come in the form of a question about the thing that they needed to upskill. And then it's just like a realization. But if you ask a question about, it's honest because you brought it up, but you haven't said, next time, check your mirror.
Yeah, no, definitely, and yeah, I agree. What I tend to, and it sounds like you've done the same though. What I tend to do is start with the bigger question. The talk to me about the junction, talk to me about the roundabout, and the
Quite well, yeah.
yeah, what went well, and that I think that will often get you what you want, and lead that conversation. But occasionally, and this is where I think people get confused with the coaching, where they think they keep asking and asking and asking, and like they're scared to mention the thing because it should be the pupil that recognizes it, and it's great when the pupil recognizes it, but sometimes you're not aware of the issue, and the coaching absolutely is about raising someone's awareness and then coaching them through the process of improving it. So I think that's yeah, it's okay to mention the thing.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be this guessing game that in the car. Like, and I've literally sat in a car before, and I've heard a pupil say, "I don't know what you want me to say," because the instructor is trying. Like they're like, "What about this? What about?" And like they're trying, and you can see the instructor wants a particular answer. The pupil can see that, and the rapport's lost. It's become this sort of kind of guessing game, and when you're in that guessing game, and I'm sure there's plenty of instructors out there that have done that, that's when you know it's okay to go, how about this? Let's discuss this. You're still coaching, you're still the pupil's still doing all the solutions, all the work, but you've just brought in a part of the conversation. And it doesn't have to be, yeah, it doesn't have to be this sort of kind of guessing game, I think, is the what I see it as.
The art of asking questions is so that that person never feels uncomfortable.
Hmm.
We need to use our other skills to work out if there's any discomfort. Sometimes people are silent because they're thinking, and sometimes people are silent because they're just in panic mode, trying to work out what we want, what I want them to say. And it's really uncomfortable. So notice that, and then just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm being a," and we can take ownership. I am so sorry, I've asked a really rubbish question there.
Yeah.
And just take ownership of it. People love it. You don't
Done
have
that
to.
in the car before. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I've
pretty
done it.
sure.
I've asked a brilliant question while they're driving, and you can see them going, "Oh, da, da." And I'm like, oh, just ignore me. I shouldn't have
Yeah.
asked that while we were driving.
Yeah.
Just I'll ask that in a minute in a sensible way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've done that. Yeah, like let's just pause that question. Don't answer that. Yeah,
Sorry, my bad.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, and again, I love that because I think that you've got like people hopefully listening to this who are looking to improve and will see themselves doing these sort of things. And I think people have this image of this perfect lesson in their head, and it rarely is. It's like regularly stuff goes wrong. We're aiming to not for perfection, but we're aiming to improve all the time. And that's all you can do really is just like go and try and improve.
Be honest. People don't mind honest.
Hmm.
People respect that more than you trying to be perfect, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So honest with yourself, honest with your pupils. That can be the theme of today's podcast. Honesty all around.
No.
Yeah, no, because it's one of actually my bugbears is people trying to like I phrase it as being too nice, but you can be honest and nice at the same time. Although some of my instructors would disagree. They're
Yeah.
always
Well, yeah, I think honesty, it can, because sometimes you do need to have those honest conversations about, I feel really uncomfortable when you're doing that, and it could be approach speed. And you just have to say it as it is. I feel really uncomfortable as a passenger. When people are speeding about all over the place.
yeah,
And if you're uncomfortable, they'll read it in your body language.
yeah, definitely.
And it will come out in your tone of voice when you're talking about them and you're having a conversation about use of speed.
Yeah,
And it will come out. So, be honest about what it is, and then there's no mistake. That's the importance of the honesty.
love it. So thank you very much for coming on. Before we let you run away, I will let you let everyone know how they find you, and then the final thing I ask everyone, which I always forget to preempt and pre-warn you, is a top tip. Which
The warning.
yeah, I know I never warn anyone, but I always think actually we end up getting better top tips that way because I think it's just off the top of your head what's in the moment your top tip, and sometimes it's to do with what we've been talking about, sometimes it's not. But yeah, first, do you want to let everyone know where they can find you if they want to come on one of your lovely courses or come and get your
I'm on PDI ADI.
Yep.
The courses. Message me, Facebook me if everyone's on Facebook, but Fiona Taylor. You can email me through Fiona Drive, although occasionally I'm having a lot of work done on my website. So I think that the easiest place is Facebook, just Fiona. And I've got the word Fiona and a little car sitting on top if you want to find me as a person. So,
I'll put a link to your profile in the
yeah, if you could do that, then that's the easiest way.
Top tip.
Top tip.
What's your top tip for everyone?
Learn to listen, but listen with your eyes.
Nice.
Total listening. And I think you hear so much more. You get so much more.
Absolutely. I love that one. One tip actually, just to tag on to that, is to help with this, I think, is record yourself and watch it back, because I notice sitting in the back of lessons, it's so much easier to listen when you're in the back and you're not part of the conversation. You're not trying to think what's next to say. And the same applies when you watch back a video. You suddenly realize that you didn't wait a minute, why didn't I pick up on what they just said there? And it's because you were thinking of your next question and not listening into that thing. So I think that can be really helpful to raise your awareness of when you aren't listening, which will then help you improve it in future lessons.
Anyone can Google the characteristics of deeper listening, active listening, they call it. There's 10 characteristics. And we traditionally have all the answers, so we want to give them. But very often you can see people, they've asked, "Are you okay?" And the reply is, "Yeah." Or there's a micro expression.
Yeah.
Listen with your ears, pause, wait, but look. So listen with your eyes as well.
Brilliant. I love that. That's a great way to finish it. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
My absolute pleasure. I've loved it, Phil. Thank you.
Inspire Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops.